what's shaking, everybody? We are here for a little instant analysis slash breaking news slash recruiting discussion, if you will. Greetings here on the Orangebloods Texas Football Channel. I'm Jeff Ketchum. This video brought to you by MyPerfectFranchise.net. If you're ready to change your life, stop working for the man, and you want to be the man, contact Andy at MyPerfectFranchise.net, or use that number right there on the screen. The big news of this afternoon within the last hour is that Arizona prep star from Mountain Point from the Phoenix area, Christian Clark, not unexpectedly, gives his commitment to the Longhorns. It's a big one as far as I'm concerned. Let's give you some basic info on Clark. He's 6 foot, 200 pounds. If you look at the Rivals rankings, in the industry rankings, Rivals has him, if I'm not mistaken, the highest rated of any of the services at this point. They have him rated at number 154 overall nationally. ESPN, On3, 24/7. Nobody else has him ranked quite that high or amongst their national 200 or 300. I think Clark is even better than that. I think if Christian Clark were a prospect from the state of Texas, we'd be talking about a kid in my rankings that would be somewhere in the state top 10. I think he is an absolute super blue chip prospect. I don't throw that around loosely. Anybody that follows my rankings, that follows the discussions that I have, they know that that's rarefied air. I think Clark is the best commitment in this Texas class so far. It's a big deal. The Longhorns have been trending for Clark for most of the last couple of months. He took an official visit to USC back in May, visited Florida State on June 2nd, Oregon on June 9th, was scheduled to visit Georgia this weekend, canceled that visit. He's got offers from Alabama, Miami, Stanford, Tennessee, A&M, UCLA. He's a bona fide national prospect. And I think that, when you watch him closely, there is a little bit of Bijan Robinson in Christian Clark's game. He doesn't have the Barry Sanders-ish stop and start moves that you often see from Bijan when he's making guys miss. But just like with Bijan, defenders bounce off of this guy. And when he makes a cut and then out of that cut makes a decision on where he's going, he has a burst that for me is very similar to Bijan. He's a north-south guy. One of the things I like about Christian Clark as a running back is that he's not one of these. One of the early criticisms that I had of C.J. Baxter before he committed to Texas last year was that if you watch Baxter's film, there's a whole lot of bouncing it to the outside. Fast guys in high school trust their speed and that they can get to the corner on the outside every time. And the problem is when they get to this level and then even the level beyond that, bouncing it to the outside all the time is not the best recipe for success. What I really love about Clark is that he makes most of his hay between the tackles. And when he makes his cut, the big cut, if you will, the cut that generates his explosiveness through a hole into the second level and then beyond, he very much is a straight line north-south runner. It's exactly what you want inside of his skill set. For all of the speed and explosiveness that this kid has inside of him, it doesn't necessarily translate to him thinking that he's a track guy or a pure outside runner at the high school level. He does a little bit of everything. And then one of the things that stands out about his game that I'm not quite sure who to compare it to, although maybe you might throw out a guy like Cedric Benson, is that Clark runs with a serious lean. When he makes contact with guys, when he's at the end of his run, his effort and the way he finishes runs always seems to generate at least a yard or two more than they probably should. He's an absolute finisher as a high school running back. And a guy that I think when he arrives on campus next season in 2024, I think he's a guy that comes right in and potentially finds a role immediately. Texas has 5 total sophomore and freshman running backs on the roster right now. Some of that will eventually take care of itself. Eventually you're going to see some of the players that have come in the last few recruiting classes depart. To me, you can close your eyes and imagine a CJ Baxter, Christian Clark 1-2 punch that I think would be potentially one of the best 1-2 punches in all of college football. A little bit of math. In the history of the Rivals rankings, only one player from the state of Arizona at the running back position has ever been rated higher than where Christian Clark currently is in the Rivals rankings. And yeah, you probably can guess who that is or was, Bijan Robinson. So the Longhorns dipped into the state of Arizona in 2020 to get Robinson, and obviously he emerges as one of the best 4 or 5 running backs in the history of the school. They go back out to the state of Arizona, something that you can really see them starting to do with a lot more frequency. Neither Arizona or Arizona State really defending their turf especially well. And it's led to Texas finding some success in the state of Arizona. They're doing more of it this year than they have in the last couple of years. And the success, the proof's in the pudding. This commitment being one of them. He visits last weekend on his official visit. His commitment comes in today, 24 hours before Jarrett Gibson, the IMG running back out of Florida, is scheduled to visit. I think Texas gets both of those guys. But for me, if you were going to have one, if you could only have one of the two guys, my favorite back outside of Caden Durham in this entire recruiting class that I've seen so far is Christian Clark. So Texas got the guy that I think they needed to get. I think it's a big deal for Texas on a lot of different levels. Again, their ability to go inside the state of Arizona now and start to pick apart what's available in Arizona, much to the chagrin of guys like Rashad Samples and Brian Carrington, who there's a lot of fuss made about them taking jobs at Arizona State and the impact that they might have in the state of Texas in recruiting. I think you may end up finding out that when this recruiting class is all said and done, this recruiting year, that Texas will do more damage in the state of Arizona than the Arizona State guys were able to do inside the state of Texas. Most of the guys at Arizona State are having success with inside the state of Texas. It doesn't really impact the University of Texas. Whereas Texas going into Arizona and stealing their cornbread and taking big pieces of talent away from Arizona and Arizona State absolutely leaves a mark. Eric Torres jumping into the super chat. By the way, guys, do me a solid. Like this video. If you're pumped up about the commitment of Christian Clark, by all means, hit that thumbs up, like this video, subscribe to the channel, get notifications, ring that bell if you haven't already done that. Eric jumping into the super chat, El Presidente, saying Tashard Choice, #1 recruiter on Sark staff. Maybe. Very, very well, maybe. I mean, Jeff Banks is a guy that jumps to mind. Sarkisian is probably the best recruiter on this staff. Tashard Choice is right there. And not only does Choice do a great job in recruiting, he does a fantastic job in terms of evaluation. Christian Clark, not only a national top 150-ish player in one of the networks, and that's Rivals. And Rivals only moved Clark into the 4-star territory, if I'm not mistaken, in this most recent recruiting update that they did. Although I might be getting the other Arizona kid. Texas has been dipping into Arizona to such an extent that I might be getting my Arizona commitments confused, because Santana Wilson was a 3-star guy that did get bumped up to 4 stars. But in order for Texas to really come across Christian Clark, it required Tashard Choice to jump in from an evaluation standpoint and kind of do his own work. You couldn't necessarily grab a list of the top 10 running backs across the country and go one by one and offer them all and found your way to Christian Clark. This was maybe the best evaluation that Tashard Choice, I think, has done since he showed up at Texas. It's pretty easy to go. CJ Baxter, borderline 5-star guy. Jarrett Gibson, a guy out of IMG, again, that'll be on campus tomorrow, and I think ends up being a member of this Texas recruiting class, really highly recruited. I think Christian Clark's going to end up being a national top 10 running back, but he didn't really do the camp circuit. He really hasn't been at the national events that catch national eyeballs. So kudos to Tashard Choice for landing Christian Clark. Like, that's one thing, but to be on top of that evaluation, and I think to be ahead of the curve in terms of identifying him as a guy that they wanted in this class and making, I don't agree with them not going after Caden Durham, the kid out of Duncanville that will probably end up at Oklahoma or LSU when it's all said and done. I don't know how you ignore a kid that's running 10-2 track times as a junior in high school. But if I were ranking running backs, Caden Durham might be my number one guy. And then again, Christian Clark right there with him. I think he's if the recruiting services wake up and figure it out, this is a guy that I think ends up being a consensus super blue chip prospect when it's all said and done. K Horn says another player not in the top 100. I'm not feeding you BS on this one, K Horn. I don't do that. I'm honest about the rankings and the expectations and what people should expect out of these players. For instance, I'm not as high on Jarrett Gibson, who's much more highly ranked than Clark is at the moment. Gibson's rated as a super blue chip by Rivals and a number of other I think all of the services, I have to look it up, all of the services have Gibson ranked higher than Clark. And I've been one of the few people that have said, I don't know that Jarrett Gibson's a super blue chip level prospect, but I've thought Christian Clark was. So if you think that I'm only telling you this because you got a commitment. You don't know me very well, and you haven't been keeping up with what I've been writing over at orangebloods.com. But yes, not a top 100 guy yet, but a guy that I think if everybody wakes up, he will be. Rodolfo asks, is Gibson overrated? I don't think he's a national top 50 or 60 guy to my naked eyeball test. He's probably I think if you flip-flop the rankings of Gibson and Clark, you probably have it spot on. I think Clark should be a national top 70 kind of a guy, top 60, top 50. And I think Gibson's probably more of a national 100 to 150, which means personally, I would rank Gibson as a mid 4-star running back, and I would have Clark as a high 4-star running back. Some people will think that that's splitting hairs. I think Gibson's really good. Do I think he's elite of the elite? I don't know that I think that yet. And look, I wasn't completely sold on CJ Baxter on that level of running back a year ago, and then I watched him as a senior, and then I felt like, okay, I see that now. Maybe we'll see that from Jarrett Gibson this year at IMG when it's all said and done. I don't know that his film quite gets my juices flowing quite like Christian Clark's does. Another comment in the super chat from the Google Scholar, I just can't make sense of allowing Caden Durham to go to Oklahoma. Not only that, but giving them a foothold at Duncanville. Make that make sense. Look, you're preaching to the choir on that one. Here's what I would say. Caden Durham visited Oklahoma a lot last year. I mean, if I go back, let me go to Caden Durham's page on Rivals real quick. I've just so happened to be writing something up for the War Room, and his stuff's right in front of me. He visited them on July 27th, September 10th, November 5th, January 28th, and then he took his official visit this past weekend. That's that I've been able to keep track of. So over the course of the last 11 months, he's been to Norman at least 5 times. He hadn't taken a visit to Texas once, despite Tashard Choice offering just a couple of months ago they'd not been able to get Durham on campus. It's possible that they just looked at the number of visits that kid was making to Oklahoma, and they waved the white flag early, especially knowing that they were really hot to trot after Gibson, knowing that they were hot to trot after Christian Clark, It may have been they felt like where they were with these running backs was the answer to the question of why not go after Caden Durham with a full load of steam. I would just say this. LSU saw Oklahoma have the same advantages, and they've been able to get in that recruitment. I don't completely understand it. It's a little crazy, but it kind of is what it is. And yes, I expect Caden Durham to go to Oklahoma. I don't completely understand the slowness with which Texas, because, you know, there's a kid from Duncanville coming into town this weekend, kind of an important prospect. You know, this just in, Colin Simmons, really important to this recruiting class for the Longhorns. If you evaluated Simmons, you would have evaluated Durham, and I don't know why they've been slow, but they weren't slow to Christian Clark. And again, that's the real focus of today's video. A guy that I think is a super blue chip talent, and a guy that he might not be Caden Durham because not many kids are running 10.25s as a junior in high school. But he is in, I think, a class just below that. I think he's a sensational player and prospect. Stephen Baker jumps into the chat, says Clark's film is good, has some Bijan in him with quick cuts in the box. Stephen, I agree. I think you can watch Christian Clark and see some Bijan. They're not. It's not apple for apple. They're not the same guy, but there are parts of his game that will remind you of Bijan Robinson, and that's kind of obviously an exciting deal. I'm looking through some of the other people are asking me what's been going on at LSU. I got to be completely honest. I released my top 100 for the class of 2025. The latest updates on that today. Couple that with me working on war room stuff for tonight, and then the Christian Clark commitment breaking when it did. If something's been going on at LSU today, it hasn't completely been on my radar. Plus state 7-on-7 going on today. So we've been doing all of that. I think I may have just got – okay, so according to what I'm looking at, they vacated a bunch of wins. Nobody really cares about that from a bunch of seasons that didn't matter. There's a probationary period. LSU, a little bit of trouble. Shocker there, but it doesn't look like the hammer was really dropped on LSU with any real power. And as it relates to this running back conversation, my expectations are that that Durham will end up at Oklahoma when it's all said and done. Let's see, moving on. Rodolfo asks, will there be a K&A live tomorrow on Friday? Yes, but Anwar won't be a part of it. It will be me and maybe a guest. But yes, we will be live on Friday, 11:30 Central, as we are all the time. Chris Nelson in the chat says, nobody cares about vacated wins. Ain't that the truth? Des says, no matter what's going on, has to get some negativity in. Don't really know if that's directed at me or someone in the chat. I don't know that a person can be any more positive about the commitment of Christian Clark than I have been, considering I have him rated higher than anybody does nationally. So, Des, I don't know if that was directed at me or not, but if it was, maybe pay attention. If it wasn't, disregard that remark. Let's see. Jason and I did a full analysis of this upcoming weekend's visits yesterday in the Crewcast. So definitely take a look at that. If you want the full preview for tomorrow's visit, we'll be talking a lot about it tomorrow as well in our live video at 11:30, the K&A minus the A, if you will. Although maybe I'll find somebody who has an A in their name, first or last initial, and we'll continue with K&A. Outside of that, Jesse Wyatt says, I like Clark way better than Gibson, but my favorite too. Jesse, we're kind of on the same page there. I can't say enough good things about Christian Clark. I think people may look at the national rankings the way they're currently positioned. And again, if you go to his rankings, Christian Clark is a high 3-star for 24/7. He's a low 4-star for ESPN and On3. Rivals has him as a mid 4-star and the number 3. To give you an idea of how that translates. So Rivals has him as a mid 4-star. They have him ranked as a number 3 prospect in the state of Arizona. ESPN has him at 6 in the state of Arizona. On3 has him at 7 in the state of Arizona. 24/7 has him at number 11 in the state of Arizona. Considering I think he's better than all of that, it may mean that a national top 60 or 70, and I need to look it up, but clearly I think he'd be a top 3 prospect in the state of Arizona, maybe number 2. I think they got a 5-star this year. They've got Raiola, the quarterback. So he wouldn't be number 1 in the state of Arizona. And I think they may even have a second 5-star, if I'm not mistaken. But number 3 in the state of Arizona, national top 50 to 70 guy. That's kind of where my head is at this point. Jesse says my favorite running back in the class of 2024 is Taylor Tatum, the kid out of Longview. I don't think Tatum is in Caden Durham's class. I would probably rank Clark slightly ahead of Tatum, but they're really close. I like Taylor Tatum a lot myself. I think he's a national top 100 level guy. I don't know that I think he's a super blue chip guy. He's probably going to end up at USC when it's all said and done. Oklahoma trying to make a dent, but not quite. Tatum, I kind of had penciled in for Michigan for months. And then when it was all said and done, this week he cancels the official visit to Michigan after coming out of the visit with USC this past weekend. If we were to rank Durham, Tatum, Clark, and Gibson, I would probably in this order go 1 Durham, 2 Clark, 3 Tatum, 4 Gibson. That's just me. If it's all said, when it's all said and done. Let's see. One more question I'll take before we wrap things up on this short instant analysis video of Christian Clark's commitment to the University of Texas. Brazar 10 says chances with Wingo in Texas, probably not sky high. They're in the top 5. I think the key will be getting him on campus. He visits officially last week. I think the key to potentially, he's not going to make a decision until really close to signing day, if not on signing day. I think Missouri is going to be one of his top 2 schools. So Texas is going to have to beat out the likes of Georgia to get into that top 2. I think they're probably behind right now. And I think in order to get to close with Ryan Wingo, Texas will need to get him on campus again, maybe a couple times. I think you want to get him in during the season and not just for swim parties and things like that. But anytime you can get him on campus, my rule of thumb, and it's less of a rule of thumb with out-of-state guys, but Wingo has already visited Texas, I think, 3 times. The next one would be his 4th. They're starting to climb up there. Again, I think they're in the top 5. I just wonder if they're not going to end up being a bridesmaid when it's all said and done and not the bride. It may come down to how well the Texas passing game looks this season. Does Quinn Ewers and A.D. Mitchell and Xavier Worthy, do they blow up in such a way that being a wide receiver at Texas truly is the thing that cool kids do? I mean, there's a lot of time to still make up ground on Ryan Wingo when it's all said and done. Jesse Wyatt says Clark reminds him of Tomlinson. As a guy that saw Tomlinson in high school, it's not the first comparison. LT always had a little bit more shake and bake in his game than I think Clark has. Clark reminds me more of a really young Terrell Davis. His ability to one cut and go is the thing that really stands out to me about his skill set. Physical, but has game-changing breakaway ability. His burst out of his cuts is the thing that stands out more than his speed, quickness, anything that they could test for. When he plants and goes, Christian Clark becomes a truly, truly special prospect. Last comment I'll let in. Amar says Clark will outshine Baxter. I will say this. I like Clark stuff coming out of his junior season more than I like Baxter stuff coming out of his junior season. And everybody was like Cocoa for Cocoa Puffs over CJ Baxter at this point last summer. I was a little cooler, eventually came around and signed off on kind of the borderline 5-star ranking. Before that, I was a little more national 100 than national top 40. But I think Baxter proved during his senior season that he was of that caliber of player. And we're waiting to see that really take off while on campus for Texas during his true freshman season. Okay, that's that. Do me a solid. Like this video. Smash that thumbs up button. The Longhorns got themselves a big-time recruit today. The like button today needs to come into play more than just about any other day because this is a big deal. Subscribe to the channel. Do that along with smashing the little thumbs up button. I don't want to do that on camera. Then people will be like, oh, you didn't kick them. And I get weird emails or DMs anytime. The color palette or God forbid you do a thumbs up. Do the Aggies really get to own the thumbs up? Isn't that more universal than their gig 'em when it's all said and done? Just something to think about. For myself and Blake, who's holding it down in the producing room, making sure, there you go, scan that bad boy. We've got all the coverage that you need right now. Until then, you guys have a great rest of the day. We'll see you tomorrow.